Google, 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 Google! Love it or hate it, you've gotta have it. Think about it. When you have a pressing question that nags at your brain, how do you go about finding the answer? Do you A, ask another human in dialogue? Maybe, but probably not. Or B, do you look to a book for guidance? Yeah, right. Or C, do you whip out your phone and Google search that sucker up? That's a bingo! It's just so freaking easy, isn't it? I mean, they should just scratch the word convenience out of the dictionary and replace it with Google. Now, please understand, I'm not judging you for using Google search whatsoever. I mean, how could I? I use it all the time and I love how convenient it's made my life. But to be honest, I begin to grow somewhat concerned about how our quick access to information through Google could potentially be affecting us negatively as individuals and at a societal level. Disclaimer time! If you're thinking that I'm just about to go off on Google saying it's the most evil thing since how,
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
and that it should be dismantled for the peace, justice, and liberty for all, you're wrong. Believe it or not, I don't really think that Google itself is the actual problem. I mean, how could it be? It's not human. Or is it? We'll leave that for another conversation. Even though I can't fully blame it, I do believe that the quick rate in which we can access information through Google is negatively impacting us in several ways. Today, let's focus on how it's affecting our minds. Let's just jump into it and explore one of the more highly debated areas attributed to Google, how it's affected our attention span. I'll begin with a simple observation. Think about the last time you searched for an answer on Google. Tell me, what happened when you hit the enter button? Well, the first thing you've probably never noticed is the small gray numbers that show up at the top of the result list. In case you didn't know, that's actually the amount of time that it took Google to gather all that information for you and present it in the search results. Now, the second thing you may not have been completely aware of was the first result that shows up. Often, especially if you're asking a direct question, the answer will have this little box around it with a very simplified answer from a web page. So then answer me this. How much attention was actually needed to get the answer that you were looking for? In this particular case, 0.65 seconds. I mean, in essence, you actually needed more of an attention span to type out the question than you did for the actual response itself. This is significantly different from the days when we used to have to go look through books, or even when we had to deal with dial-up for that instance. But let's move away from my simple observations and move more to facts. About 3 years ago, a study was done by Microsoft, of all people, where they set out to study attention spans. Guess what they found? Between the year 2000 and 2015, the average attention span had actually dropped from around 12 seconds to 8 seconds. Now, this may not seem like a lot, but for reference, a goldfish supposedly has an attention span of around 9 seconds. People, we are potentially losing to goldfish. Now, to play devil's advocate, I have heard criticisms of this study. They say that the research was poorly done and would provide other studies about how professional video game players are now more efficient and how they manage multiple tasks, aka they have better attention spans. But a 20-year study done by the German Psychological Association found that even though gamers may be more efficient in movements and task management, they are still not processing the information. Processing being the most important word in that statement. The doubter then offers the rebuttal that loss of attention span is actually an insignificant topic, and that we should let it go because we're creating unnecessary panic amongst the general population. But I disagree. And so does the German Psychological Association. Just saying. It's of the utmost importance because people with shorter attention spans then have a less likelihood of being able to process information properly. And here lies our next problem. We are losing our ability to properly process information. You wanted a problem? Well, you got one now, and a very concerning one at that. We skim through information, but then we end up missing deeper meaning and context to what we're reading. Instead of deep emotion-provoking literature, we're instead left with idiotic bumper sticker catchphrases like, "Sometimes you have to forget what you want in order to remember what you deserve." I'll be tackling these types of statements in a future video, but I digress. Where was I? Oh yes. The inability to process information then jeopardizes the general intellectual development of our population. When we look at individuals not processing information correctly, it really doesn't have that big of an impact. But then when you think of billions of people across the globe, our future makers, not processing information, then it becomes substantially more concerning. What I find more disturbing than anything is how news agencies have found a way to capitalize on our short attention span and our inability to process information properly. Think about it. They prey on the population by not posting what's true, but what's most eye-catching. And the saddest part of it all is that we pay them to do it. I'll discuss further complications of this in a few videos down the line, but for now we'll leave it at that. Alright, so far we've discussed shorter attention spans and a decreased ability to process information. So what else could possibly be on this list? The degradation of our own memory. The Hebrews memorized their sacred texts. The Greeks memorized their poetry and deep philosophical works. And up until recently, oral transmission of information reigned reigns supreme. And then there's me. I can hardly remember my own phone number without my phone. I want you to consider something. For the first time in human history, information is being stored almost exclusively outside of our craniums. But then someone in the corner says, "Excuse me, we humans have always stored information outside of ourselves, from writing on cave walls to printing in books. And people have historically always cried wolf when new ways of storing that information arises." Fair point, but again, it's not the act of storing information that's problematic. It's the quick rate at which we can access it that is. I think this would be a perfect time to come back to a book versus computer comparison. With a book, you have to put time and effort into finding the information you want to find. You have to read all the way through, you have to gather everything in context, and then you can pull out the line and say what you're trying to say. With a computer, we don't have to access any of this. We just go in, type up what we want to type, get our answer, and boom, done. We haven't worked through processing the information, and we surely haven't used our memory to actually remember anything that we did, because we're not processing it. Now, this has been researched fairly well, and the phenomenon of information being stored outside of ourselves is actually called cognitive offloading. This term was coined by a Canadian researcher named Evan F. Gilbert. It's really interesting in his research because he says one of the main consequences of cognitive offloading is that people tend to have less vivid recollection of their own experiences and memories, such as when you visit a museum or travel abroad. Now, cognitive offloading can be generalized to a greater bound of technology, not just Google. But in looking at his research, I find that Google fits in this slot very, very well. Let's take a museum, for example. If we're using technology, say Google, to give us information about everything we're seeing, our attention is then diverted from the actual experience itself, and our minds aren't allowed to learn the environment the same way that they would had we not been using that technology. Our biological resources are then proverbially put in the backseat of the car like an infant in a car seat. We are then in effect underutilizing our memory, and as the saying goes, if you don't use it, you lose it. So is there any conclusion to this? Well, kind of. It's usually a wise thing to go where the evidence leads, and I would say that in this case, it would be completely within reason to say that the quick rate in which we can access information through Google is at least partially responsible for negatively affecting our minds in the way in which we learn. But this isn't the end of the conversation. We've yet to even consider the effects on our own self-perceptions or our society as a whole. Don't worry though, that's coming up next week. For now, let's keep this conversation rolling. What are your thoughts on this topic? Did I miss anything important, or did I perhaps take things too far with what I said? Let me know. Join the discussion. And lastly, if you found this video at all enjoyable, would you consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the little notification button? I'd love to have you join us. Well, this certainly isn't the end of the conversation, so make sure to join me next week as we continue the discussion on how Google is affecting us. But until next week, keep thinking.